1:09 a.m. The South China Sea, 147 nautical miles northwest of the Philippine island of Palawan. The water here is the deepest in the South China Sea. The West Philippine Basin drops to more than 5,000 meters below the keel, cold and dark and utterly unlike the shallow continental shelf waters to the north, where China's artificial island fortifications sit on reclaimed coral. The surface is a long, easy swell from the southeast, sea state 2, air temperature 27 degrees Celsius, wind at 9 knots. The sky is covered by a high overcast at 28,000 feet that extinguishes the stars and turns the ocean horizon into a seamless band of darkness without reference or depth. The USS Theodore Roosevelt, CVN-71, a Nimitz-class nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, the third ship of her class, holds course at 14 knots on a westerly heading, her two A-4W nuclear reactors running at 36% power. She is the centerpiece of Carrier Strike Group 12, operating in the South China Sea in support of U.S. Indo-Pacific Command's Freedom of Navigation and Presence mission. A signal delivered in the currency that matters most in this body of water: tonnage, air power, and willingness to be here. Her air wing, Carrier Air Wing 17, 42 strike aircraft and 18 support and rotary platforms. Her complement, 5,091 personnel. Surrounding her in standard formation, the cruiser USS Bunker Hill, CG-52, 1 mile ahead on the axis of advance, her AN/SPY, 1A radar completing its 3-second search rotation without pause. The destroyers USS Halsey, DDG-97, and USS Dewey, DDG-105, at the forward quarters, both running Aegis baseline 9.C1. The destroyer USS Stockdale, DDG-106, at the stern quarter. Above the formation, an E-2D Advanced Hawkeye from Carrier Air Wing 17 orbits at 26,000 feet above the overcast, its AN/APY-9 radar pushing 300 nautical miles of unobstructed coverage into the Link 16 network. Below the overcast, 2 FA-18F Super Hornets maintain the night combat air patrol, their APG-79 AESA radars in air-to-air search mode, their pilots scanning the darkness ahead of the formation. 412 miles to the northwest, beneath the surface of the South China Sea at a depth of 220 meters, the People's Liberation Army Navy submarine, Type 093B, a Chang'e-class nuclear-powered attack submarine, runs silent on a southeasterly heading that has been carrying it toward the Roosevelt Strike Group's predicted position for 19 hours. Alongside it, at a separation of 40 miles, a second Type 093B. The two submarines are the eyes of the operation, positioned to confirm the carrier's precise location, speed, and course for the targeting solution that would be fed to the YJ-18 launch platforms positioned on the surface 300 miles to the northwest. The YJ-18, Yingji, Eagle Strike, 18. The People's Liberation Army Navy's primary long-range anti-ship cruise missile, deployed on Type 052D destroyers, Type 093 submarines, and H-6K maritime strike aircraft. The YJ-18 is a two-phase weapon, a solid-fuel rocket booster phase that carries the missile at subsonic speed over its cruise range of 500 kilometers, followed by a terminal phase in which the booster separates and a ramjet sustainer ignites, accelerating the surviving missile body to Mach 3 in the final 40 kilometers of flight. At Mach 3 sea skimming approach, The YJ-18's terminal segment is faster than most close-in weapon systems can reliably track and engage. The plan had invested heavily in this weapon specifically because of its terminal velocity. The terminal velocity was the missile's primary argument that it could penetrate American carrier strike group defenses. It was a persuasive argument. In a single-ship engagement against a non-networked defense, the plan had assembled 18 Type 052D destroyers and 4 Type 093B submarines for Operation East Passage, the largest coordinated anti-ship strike exercise the plan had ever conducted in the South China Sea. Redesignated from exercise to operational strike in the 72 hours before this engagement following a political decision made at the highest levels of the Central Military Commission. 18 surface combatants, each carrying 8 VLS-loaded YJ-18 missiles ready for simultaneous launch, 4 submarines, each carrying 6 YJ-18 in torpedo tube-launched configuration. Total launch capacity, 168 YJ-18 missiles, against the Roosevelt Strike Group. The plan operational planners had conducted 37 simulation runs of this engagement in the preceding 6 months. Their model predicted that a simultaneous or near-simultaneous salvo of 168 YJ-18 missiles approaching the carrier strike group from multiple bearings would create an engagement timeline where the combined defensive magazine of the formation would be exhausted before all incoming missiles could be intercepted. Their simulations predicted that between 8 and 23 missiles would penetrate the defense and achieve hull contact on the carrier or its escorts. The simulations were wrong. They were wrong for 6 reasons. The first reason: the Type 093B acoustic signature. The 2 planned submarines that had positioned themselves to confirm the Roosevelt's precise location for the targeting solution had been operating at 220 meters depth for 19 hours. Their reactors, running at the power level required to maintain 17 knots of approach speed. USS Annapolis, SSN 760, a Los Angeles-class fast-attack submarine assigned to the Roosevelt Strike Group's ASW screen, had acquired an acoustic contact consistent with a Type 093B nuclear submarine at 8:47 p.m., more than 4 hours before the PLAN launch. The contact had been classified as ProbSub at 9:14 p.m., and upgraded to submerged contact Sierra 1 at 10:02 p.m. as additional acoustic detail accumulated. The strike group commander had been notified at 10:05 p.m. The formation had been at heightened ASW and air defense readiness since 10:15 p.m. 3 hours before the first YJ-18 left its launcher, the strike group knew submarines were in the water. The second reason: the launch platform emissions. 18 Type 052D destroyers conducting coordinated strike preparation in the South China Sea at 1 a.m. generated electromagnetic emissions, search radar rotations, data link traffic between ships coordinating their fire control solutions, IFF interrogations, that were visible to the E-2D's AN/APY-9 radar as a surface contact cluster at 300 miles, and to the EP-3E Ares 2 signals intelligence aircraft operating from Kadena Air Base in Okinawa that had been tasked to the South China Sea surveillance orbit since 9 p.m. The EP-3E had been logging the planned surface group's emissions since 11:30 p.m., building a comprehensive electronic order of battle picture that included the targeting radar frequencies, ship identities, and launch preparation indicators that would precede a YJ-18 salvo. At 12:47 a.m., 22 minutes before the first missile launched, the EP-3E transmitted a high-confidence launch imminent assessment to the Roosevelt Strike Group. The formation had 22 minutes of confirmed warning before the attack initiated. The third reason, the YJ-18 cruise phase speed. The YJ-18's subsonic cruise phase, the first 460 kilometers of its flight at Mach 0.8, was not invisible to the E-2D's radar. A missile the size and radar cross-section of the YJ-18 at 400 meters altitude, in volume search mode from an E-2D at 26,000 feet, with a radar line of sight extending to the horizon, was a detectable contact. The E-2D acquired the leading edge of the YJ-18 salvo at 1:09 a.m. and 17 seconds. 17 seconds after the first missiles launched from the PLAN surface group. The complete 168 missile salvo, spread across a front of 240 miles, approaching the formation on 7 separate bearing groups from the northwest through northeast, was on the E-2D's display and transmitted to the formation's CEC network within 4 minutes of first launch. The formation had the complete threat picture before any missile had covered a third of its cruise range. The fourth reason, the terminal phase timing fallacy. The plan simulation model for the YJ-18 terminal engagement assumed that the Mach 3 terminal phase, the 40-kilometer ramjet acceleration segment, would compress the defensive reaction time to a window too short for close-in weapons to engage all surviving missiles. The calculation was correct for individual ship defense against a saturating salvo. It was not correct for a networked multi-ship defense where the CEC network assigned intercept responsibility based on geometric advantage rather than proximity, and where SM-6 and SM-2 Block IIIB missiles were engaging YJ-18 missiles in their subsonic cruise phase, before the terminal ramjet ignition, at ranges of 150 nautical miles. The Mach 3 terminal phase was the YJ-18's weapon of last resort against a close-in defense. The Roosevelt Strike Group's defense began 150 miles out. Most YJ-18 missiles would never reach their terminal phase. The fifth reason, the magazine calculation. Plan planners had modeled the Roosevelt Strike Group's interceptor inventory at approximately 240 ready missiles across 4 ships, a figure derived from published VLS cell counts and estimated loadout assumptions. The actual loadout across the Bunker Hill, Halsey, Dewey, and Stockdale on this deployment was 312 ready interceptors, SM-6 Dual I, SM-2 Block IIIB, and ESSM Block II, loaded at maximum capacity following a reload operation in Subic Bay 11 days earlier. 168 incoming missiles against 312 interceptors, with a per-shot intercept probability for SM-6 in excess of 85% against a subsonic cruise phase target, meant the formation had more than sufficient magazine depth to engage the entire planned salvo with interceptors remaining in reserve. The sixth reason was not technical. It was institutional. The 37 planned simulation runs had modeled an American carrier strike group reacting to a surprise attack. A formation caught unprepared, whose engagement sequence would be slowed by the human processing time required to classify, assign, and authorize engagement of a sudden mass threat. The Roosevelt Strike Group had been at heightened readiness since 10:15 p.m. It had 22 minutes of confirmed launch imminent warning. Its watch teams had been told, specifically and precisely, that a 168 missile salvo was coming from the northwest. There was no classification delay. There was no authorization delay. There was no human processing time to model because the engagement sequences were automated to the point where the TAO's authorization to execute was the only human input required. And that authorization had been given at 10:15 p.m., 3 hours before the first YJ-18 flew. At 1:09 a.m. and 17 seconds, the E-2D's first contact report transmits across the formation. Strike Group, Eagle Eye. Salvo, launch event confirmed northwest. Count 168, cruise phase, 7 bearing groups northwest through northeast. Time to engagement range approximately 42 minutes on current track. All tracks transmitted CEC. This is your complete picture. The Bunker Hills TAO authorizes Strike Group Defense Plan Alpha in the same second. All units, Bunker Hill, execute. Weapons free, all threat tracks, CEC control. Maximum engagement rate. The Cooperative Engagement Capability Network, processing the E-2D's composite track of all 168 YJ-18 contacts, begins assigning intercept responsibilities to the 4 surface ships based on geometry, bearing coverage, and missile range. The Bunker Hill, with her longer-range SPY 1A fire control, takes the northwest bearing group. 62 missiles in the most direct threat axis. Halsey and Dewey split the northeast and north bearing groups between them. Stockdale covers the trailing northwest-southwest bearing group, whose missiles have the longest time to engagement range. At 1:10 a.m., the USS Bunker Hill fires her first SM-6 dual-eye salvo, 18 missiles climbing from her forward and aft VLS cells in a 22-second ripple. Each SM-6 carries the active radar seeker and dual-mode infrared capability that allows it to guide autonomously once launched, freeing the Bunker Hill's fire control to assign new intercepts without waiting for the first salvo to complete its guidance. Against subsonic cruise phase, YJ-18 missiles at 140 nautical miles, the SM-6 dual eyes engagement geometry is favorable and its probability of intercept is high. The fire control algorithm assigns 1 SM-6 per YJ-18 target in the first salvo, with a second SM-6 assigned as backup to the 20 highest priority tracks. USS Halsey fires 22 SM-6 dual eye at 1:10 a.m. against the northeast bearing group. USS Dewey fires 20 SM-6 at 1:10 a.m. and 40 seconds against her assigned tracks. USS Stockdale fires 16 SM-6 against the trailing bearing group at 1:11 a.m. 76 SM-6. Dual-eye interceptors are airborne across 4 ships, climbing to engagement altitude and accelerating to intercept geometry against 168 YJ-18 missiles in their cruise phase, 400 kilometers northwest of the formation. The first SM-6 intercepts occur at 1:14 a.m., 4 minutes and 40 seconds after launch, as the leading SM-6 missiles reach the forward edge of the YJ-18 cruise formation and begin their terminal intercept sequences. The SM-6's active radar seeker acquires YJ-18 cruise bodies at 30 kilometers and guides to proximity detonation. The YJ-18 in cruise phase, flying at 400 meters altitude at Mach 0.8, is a radar target of moderate complexity, larger than a Shahid but faster, with a low infrared signature from its turbofan cruise engine. The SM-6's continuous rod warhead detonates within the lethal fragmentation radius, and the YJ-18 cruise body, its fuel tank ruptured and its guidance section destroyed, falls into the South China Sea. One by one and then in clusters, the first SM-6 salvo works through the northwest bearing group's leading wave. 14 intercepts in the first 4 minutes of engagement. The CEC network continuously updates the engagement picture as SM-6 intercepts are confirmed and surviving. YJ-18 tracks are reassigned to new interceptors. The Bunker Hill fires her second SM-6 salvo, 20 missiles, at 1:13 a.m. against the survivors of the first salvo and the next wave of the Northwest Bearing Group. USS Halsey fires her second salvo of 18 SM-6. USS Dewey fires 16 additional. USS Stockdale fires 12. For 27 minutes, from 1:10 a.m. to 1:37 a.m., the Roosevelt Strike Group fights the YJ-18 salvo at long and medium range with SM-6 and SM-2, Block IIIB missiles. The mathematics of the engagement are systematic. The CEC network tracks every surviving YJ-18, assigns it an interceptor, confirms the intercept, and retasks the fire control to the next target. The 168 YJ-18 missiles are reduced in count: 141 at 1:18 a.m., 109 at 1:24 a.m., 73 at 1:29 a.m., 38 at 1:34 a.m. At 1:37 a.m., the leading survivors of the YJ-18 salvo, 18 missiles that have survived the long-range SM-6 engagement, reach the 40-kilometer terminal activation range and ignite their ramjet sustainers. The transition from subsonic cruise to Mach 3 terminal approach happens in approximately 12 seconds. The 18 surviving YJ-18 terminal bodies are now closing at Mach 3, sea skimming at 8 meters altitude, below the surface radar horizon of the ships they are targeting until they reach approximately 30 kilometers. The E-2D acquires the terminal phase YJ, 18 bodies the moment their ramjets ignite. The thermal signature of a ramjet accelerating to Mach 3 is a bright infrared event at any radar elevation angle. The track data updates instantly in the CEC network. Bunker Hill fires 8 SM-2 Block IIIB against the 8 terminal phase missiles assigned to her sector. Halsey fires 6 SM-2. Dewey fires 4. The SM-2's infrared terminal seeker acquires the YJ-18 terminal body's ramjet exhaust against the dark sea surface. Proximity detonation. 14 intercepts on the first SM-2 salvo against the terminal phase missiles. 4 YJ-18 terminal bodies survived the SM-2. Engagement closing to within 15 nautical miles of the formation at Mach 3. 4 Ram Block II missiles fire from the Roosevelt's own Mark 49 launchers, 1 per surviving terminal threat. 2 intercepts. 2 YJ-18 terminal bodies survive the Ram engagement, now at 6 nautical miles and closing at Mach 3. 1 is tracking the Roosevelt. 1 is tracking the Halsey. The Roosevelt's forward Phalanx Block IIIB CIWS acquires the inbound terminal body at 2,200 meters. A 1-second burst of 20mm tungsten at 4,500 rounds per minute. The YJ-18 terminal body's warhead section is penetrated by multiple rounds at 1,800 meters. The warhead does not achieve detonation conditions. The fragments impact the ocean surface 600 meters off the Roosevelt's starboard bow. The wave reaches the flight deck as a fine spray. Nothing more. The Halsey's own Phalanx engages the second surviving terminal body at 2,100 meters. 2 bursts. The terminal body is rendered inoperable at 1,400 meters and falls into the South China Sea 400 meters off the Halsey's port quarter. Its warhead does not detonate. 1:39 a.m. and 44 seconds, 30 minutes and 27 seconds since the first YJ-18 left its launcher on a Plan Type 05 2D destroyer. 168 YJ-18 missiles. 166 intercepted or defeated in the cruise phase by SM-6. 2 destroyed in the terminal phase by SM-2. 2 terminal bodies rendered inoperable by Phalanx CIWS. 0 warhead detonations on any ship. 0 hull contacts. 0 American casualties. The Roosevelt's strike group commander keys radio. All units, strike group. All threat tracks neutralized. 0 casualties, 0 damage across all ships. Full magazine capacity remains for response operations. Authorize Trident Pacific. Execute. Trident Pacific had been maintained at Indopacom's targeting division and updated continuously for the preceding 48 hours as the planned surface group's position, course, and speed were tracked by the EP-3E and 2 Virginia-class submarines on the strike group's western flank. Every Type 05 2D destroyer had been tracked individually. Every submarine contact had been logged. The counterstrike was ready before the first YJ-18 flew at 1:40 a.m. 12 FA-18F. Super Hornets launched from the Roosevelt's electromagnetic catapults in a 16-minute cycle, each aircraft carrying 4 AGM-158C long-range anti-ship missiles and climbing northwest at Mach 1.2. 12 aircraft. 48 LRASM. The LRASM is a fire-and-forget anti-ship weapon with a range of 900 kilometers, autonomous target discrimination, and a low radar cross-section that makes it extremely difficult to detect and engage at the speeds and altitudes used for approach. Its mission: the 18 Plan Type 05 2D destroyers that launched the YJ-18 salvo, now 280 miles northwest, maneuvering on post-launch dispersal courses. The EP-3E has tracked every Type 05 2D continuously since the launch event. Their current positions, updated 11 seconds before the LRASM targeting data is programmed, are precise. 48 LRASM release at 1:52 a.m. and guide northwest on autonomous approach courses, each one programmed with the current position of a specific Type 05 2D and the discrimination criteria to identify and engage that hull type among a dispersed formation. At 1:41 a.m., the USS Annapolis fires 2 Mk-48 ADCAP heavyweight torpedoes against Sierra 1, the Type 093B submarine she has been tracking for more than 4 hours. Wire-guided to the intercept point, active homing activated at 800 meters from the predicted position. Both torpedoes guide to detonation. Sierra 1's acoustic signature disappears from the towed array at 1:46 a.m. A second Los Angeles-class submarine, USS Springfield, SSN 761, fires against Sierra 2 at 1:43 a.m. Same sequence. Sierra 2's acoustic signature disappears at 1:49 a.m. Both Plan Type 093B submarines that position themselves to support tonight's attack are no longer factors in the operational equation. At 1:56 a.m., 2B, 1B Lancer aircraft from Anderson Air Force Base on Guam, airborne since 11:30 p.m. under the elevated threat posture tasking, reach their release points northwest of the formation and deliver 36 additional LRASM against Plan surface contacts. The B-1B's AN/A PQ-164 synthetic aperture radar refines the targeting solutions in the final minutes before release. The weapons release and guide northwest toward the dispersing Plan surface group. Between 2:09 a.m. and 2:41 a.m., The combined LRASM salvo, 84 weapons from the F/A-18Fs and B-1Bs, engages the 18 Type 05 2D destroyers of the PLAN surface group. The planned ships, committed to post-launch dispersal and not configured for combined anti-air and anti-ship defense simultaneously, are engaged by multiple LRASM per hull. The EP-3E's post-engagement assessment records 17 Type 05 2D destroyers with multiple impact events confirmed by radar signature changes consistent with catastrophic hull damage. 1 Type 05 2D, the trailing ship in the dispersal formation, escapes the LRASM engagement window and turns northwest at maximum speed toward planned territorial waters. By 2:44 a.m., 95 minutes after the first YJ-18 launched, the Trident Pacific counterstrike is complete. Battle damage assessment: Indopacom Joint Intelligence Operations Center at 5 a.m., 168 YJ-18 missiles, 0 hull contacts on any American ship. 2 planned Type 093B submarines, both neutralized by USS Annapolis and USS Springfield torpedo engagement. 17 of 18 planned Type 052D destroyers, multiple LRASM impacts confirmed by radar signature analysis, assessed as mission neutralized with majority assessed as catastrophic hull damage. 1 Type 052D escaped northwest, assessed as damaged by near-miss LRASM detonation. Operational status uncertain. American losses 0. USS Theodore Roosevelt 0 damage. All escorts 0 damage. 0 American personnel casualties. At 2:51 a.m., the USS Theodore Roosevelt secures from general quarters and transitions to heightened alert status. Flight operations resume at 3:30 a.m. The first F/A-18E launches on combat air patrol as the overcast begins to thin in the pre-dawn dark. The carrier's electromagnetic catapults cycle through their test sequence. The deep, resonant thud of a catapult firing audible across the flight deck and return to full operational status. The deck crew spots the morning's first strike package forward. The reactor runs at 36%. The radar sweeps. The E-2D maintains its orbit. The South China Sea is quiet at this hour. The gas platforms to the northwest burn their flares into the overcast. The formation sails west. 168 YJ-18 missiles launched by 18 destroyers and 4 submarines, the largest anti-ship salvo in the history of the People's Liberation Army Navy, have produced 0 effect on the Roosevelt strike group and have resulted in the neutralization of the force that launched them. A networked defense, with sufficient magazine depth and engagement authority exercised at 150 nautical miles against subsonic cruise phase missiles, changes the fundamental calculus of a saturation attack. The saturation attack is designed to overwhelm a point defense. It cannot overwhelm a network that begins its engagement before the attacker is even aware the intercept has started. The Roosevelt sails west. The South China Sea is open. The Western Pacific is an American operational environment, contested but not controlled by any other power, and the carrier at its center is undamaged, operational, and precisely where American strategy requires it to be.